All right. Good morning. Autumn's here and Olga's here. Thank you both for joining me on Zoom this morning. Hope I didn't ruin anybody's morning about not doing this by not doing this in person, but having kind of an eye issue this morning. So I didn't think it was really safe for me to drive in. So, and you'll probably see me blinking funny and all of that. Love having that on a recording that'll be uploaded to Facebook as well. But so I'll be checking to see if anybody else joins us on Zoom, but so far I've just got the two. So welcome to everyone. This morning's class is Contracts 101. We're doing the inspection notice and resolution of unacceptable conditions. But we're actually backing up into the transaction because all of that starts way before we ever get to that paperwork. That whole process starts way before we ever get to that paperwork. So first, we're going to talk about the one document or one of the documents that I want to see in every loop, every buyer agency loop. And so I'm going to share a screen here in just a minute. And this isn't a complete loop. I just got this one started specifically for this class, but this is the way, and so I've named it inspection loop. And so this is the way that I suggest that you set up your loops. Your launch coach or team might ask you to set up in a particular order, but for those of you that are individual agents, at least starting out this way, this is my suggestion for the way to organize all of the loops that you have. Most of your loops are either going to be buyer loops or listing loops. And so today we're kind of concentrating on a buyer loop because that's where the paperwork initiates from inspection results. And so I have this one named inspection loop. You would have it named the buyer's name. And then a particular, once they're under contract, you would add the address onto that as well. But so this is, and I don't really have these in the order that I wouldn't have them either, but so your buyer agency folder would be the first thing that you start off with before you ever even are showing properties to a buyer. You're going to have, and again, I don't have everything in here. I'll just close that out. But in here, you would have your buyer agency agreement, the things that I suggest, and this is in a whole different Contracts 101 class when we talk about buyer agency, buyer listing agreements, or exclusive buyer agency agreements and listing agreements. Oh, Monday morning when this brain's not quite working yet. And so you would have your buyer agency agreement, you would have your Kansas and Missouri, both states, brokerage disclosure forms, because you never know, even though they say they might be looking in Missouri, they may end up looking at a property in Kansas, and you want to make sure that you're covered on both of those, and you don't have to try to backtrack and get things shared with them. Also, regardless of what kind of property they tell you they're looking for, or what age property they tell you you're looking for, I suggest that you go ahead and put the EPA lead-based paint brochure in every buyer agency. We don't need it. We don't need signatures on either one of the brokerage disclosure forms, nor on the EPA lead-based paint brochure, dangers of lead-based paint to your family. Is the name of that, but as long as it's in your loop and you have shared it with them, you have met all of the requirements of that. We do strongly recommend that all buyers read the brokerage disclosure agreements. Our contract says that it's required reading. Our agency agreements say that it's required reading, but we can't force anyone to do anything. But so as you all are, I'm sure, are aware, if not, make sure that this date is firmly in your head, that any property built before 1978 requires a lead-based paint disclosure and also requires us to provide to the buyers that EPA lead-based paint brochure. Even if they tell you that they're looking for new construction, I would still include that in there because sometimes you know, all kinds of things can happen. Buyers never really, sometimes, I shouldn't say never, sometimes really don't know what they're looking for. And if they're looking for new construction, they may end up saying, well, you know, this really isn't, you know, because the new construction doesn't have the landscaping, and there are some things that aren't established about a neighborhood sometimes. So they end up looking at older properties. Or someone's looking for new construction, you may find a nice rehab for them. Property originally built before 1978 that may still have some lead-based paint in it. So I just think it's a good idea to go ahead and share that EPA lead-based paint brochure with them. That, again, now you know all of your bases are covered, regardless of what they end up going under contract on. But the one that we're focusing here on today, and as we're talking about inspections and the resolution of unacceptable conditions, another thing that I suggest you put in every buyer's folder is and this is an internal form that you're going to find in the KWNKC templates in .loop, the KWKC Metro Inspection Advisory. And that looks like this. So we're going to talk about this for here just for a couple of minutes. So this is something that should be signed, and we do ask for signatures here on this form. You will identify your buyer. This is something to be discussed with them, because don't ever send anything to anyone without discussing what the form is. So this is something to be discussed with the buyer before you ever get into negotiations or making an offer, before you ever get into that situation. Talk with them about inspections. Lots of reasons for you to do that. Number one, most buyers are probably aware that inspections are something that can be done. Our contract certainly does accommodate that, certainly does provide for that. And we strongly recommend that they get inspections. About the only time that I ever kind of back off on that is if the buyer's a contractor and knows exactly, I mean, and a full contractor, even if they're an electrician, they may not know much about plumbing, or they may not know much about foundations. But if it's a full general contractor type person, someone who has had experience rehabbing houses or contracting on new construction, that's about the only time I back off on really almost insisting that they do inspections. We can't force anyone to do anything. I really, really, really have not liked the trend over the last few years about waiving inspections. I just never think that's a good idea. It hardly ever turns out well. We've had lots and lots of, and when I say we, I mean the industry, had lots and lots of lawsuits on that, oh, well, they didn't tell me that I shouldn't have had that inspected, kind of thing. So, and suing real estate agents. So I think it's very, very, very important to have this conversation with everyone, and to include this form in every buyer agency folder. So our inspection advisory. KW Kansas City Metro and its agents strongly recommend that buyers satisfy concerns that they have as to the physical condition of the property. Buyers have been urged to employ competent professionals to perform inspections of all conditions of the property. Buyers are advised that the choice in hiring of a professional is their own and not the broker or agent. Although buyers may be provided with past professional reports from the seller or previous buyers, buyers should hire their own professionals. The following inspections are recommended to the buyers. And this is not a complete list by any stretch of the imagination. I keep thinking that I need to find, KCRAR used to have a very extensive list of inspections that buyers could have. They've taken that off of their website, but I know I've got it somewhere. And I keep thinking I really need to find that to bring this into and share with this class, because I think that's something that there's nothing wrong with sharing that list. It's a full, complete list of inspections that a buyer could have on a property. This form, our inspection advisory, hits on the more typical ones, or the ones that are specifically addressed in our contract. And so let's kind of break down that paragraph here just a little bit. Sometimes your buyers will be looking at properties that have come back on the market. It was under contract, and that contract apart for whatever reason and is now back on the market. The most common reason why a contract falls apart is because of the inspections. Something shows up that the buyer wasn't expecting and doesn't want to deal with, or they can't renegotiate successfully. So in that situation, and if you know that that's what happened, and I'll talk about that here in just a second, or pretty sure that that's what happened, make sure that you are asking the listing agent for the copies of any previous inspection reports from any previous buyers. Your buyer is absolutely entitled to that. Our contract even says that. And the seller's disclosure says that. One of the questions on the seller's disclosure that the seller is supposed to answer and then keep updated is, has the property been inspected in the last 12 months? And if so, and it says those inspection reports, property reports, will be made available to any potential buyers. And that's exactly what it says. So your buyer's absolutely entitled to see those. And that's a great thing to have during negotiations. It's a great thing to have in hand while you are looking at a property. So ask that as just as you're investigating the property to see if you all do really want to go see it, you and your buyer. That is an excellent tool to use for your initial offer. As we are walking through a property and you are, and please don't ever try to pass yourself off as any kind of inspector. But what I do tell my clients is, well, I have realtor eyes. I don't have inspector eyes, but I do have realtor eyes. And I do see things. I'm trained to look for things in the property that may become an issue on an inspection. We are not inspectors. Don't ever say, and I hear agents say things that they shouldn't say. I've heard agents say, oh, well, there's that crack, that's nothing to worry about. That's typical for this area. Those kinds of things, please don't ever say anything like that. But we do have realtor eyes. If we're looking at most of the time when we head down into the basement or the mechanicals area of a property, and the buyer's kind of showing interest in it, I will open the electrical panel to see how much power is coming into the house. In older properties, we see, that it's still, just 100 amp service, because, way back in the day, that was plenty to power whatever electrical equipment was in the house. But in today's electronic driven world, that's not nearly enough power. Maybe it's been a house for 2 people and that was plenty, but a family of 5 is moving in, or so I just kind of open that and look at that. I take my realtor eyes and kind of look at the foundation, see if I see anything that has in the past been a concern for me, any major cracks, if I can see, or if you're walking through the house and you feel any settling, or if you see things that are maybe just a little bit off kilter, those kinds of things. Obviously, if you see mold, you're looking for those kinds of things that a buyer may not be looking for. A lot of buyers are very astute about these things, but some buyers are really just looking at the space of the property, and we're looking at the condition of the property as well. All right, so those previous inspection reports, and then the warning here that we do take inspections very seriously. Oh, another reason, but that's a really good tool for us to have any previous inspection reports. How you might be able to tell that that previous contract fell apart was if it was off, if that property was off markets in pending or backup status for 10 to 12 days or less. That's a pretty good indication that it fell apart because of inspections. A contract can fall apart for any number of reasons, but another very common one is that something happens to the buyer's financing. They can't get financing on that particular property. And that kind of raises another thing though too. If they can't get financing, it might be because of the buyer, or it could be something about the property. Maybe it had a water claim and they can't get insurance on it. Maybe it's in a flood zone, or the dwelling is in a flood zone. So all of those things, welcome to real estate, all of these things that we become very familiar with. But if it happened in the first 10 to 12 days or less, that's kind of an indication it was because of inspection. So that's A really good question, even though our seller's disclosure says that the seller is going to keep that seller's disclosure updated, that happens very rarely. You might ask for an updated seller's disclosure, but at the very least, ask for those inspection reports. And that's a tool for your buyer to use to make their offer. These are now things that we probably wouldn't have seen, or we couldn't see, or wouldn't recognize as we are walking through the property, either the buyers or you as the agent. Because inspectors look for hidden things, or they look for things that we don't look for. That's the whole purpose of the inspection. But we make our offer based on what we know and see, that what we know about the house and see about the house as we are walking through it. That's how we make our initial offer. The thing about using that and not doing their own inspections, using a previous inspection report and not doing their own inspections, leaves the buyer vulnerable to, if something does show up, something does happen later on that inspector didn't catch, your buyer has no recourse to that inspector. That inspector was working for someone else. They don't have to answer to your buyer at all. So using their own inspector, they have some recourse there. So that's the biggest reason not to do your own inspections, but it's a great tool to have if we have them. I'm going to going back up to like the second and third line there. It is not up to us to choose the inspectors that your buyer is going to use. Most buyers aren't familiar with inspectors, may not have any in their own personal database, and so might depend on you. It is, what you're going to find as you get through the business of real estate, after you've been in business for a while, you're going to find that you have favorite inspectors, right? I look for inspectors that are knowledgeable. I mean, that's number one. But another very important thing to think about inspectors is, how do they present the information to their client, to our client, their client, the buyer? Are they pretty low key about things? Are they excitable about things? And kind of present things as, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Some things may need to be presented that way, but some things are, a $5 fix. You can run up to Menards and get the piece, and that most homeowners can do. I like inspectors that kind of present things that way. My way of looking at inspections are, we're looking for those important, expensive repairs that maybe need to be made, but most of the things that the inspector finds are welcome to home ownership kinds of items. Doors that don't close properly, that swing open, and one outlet that doesn't work. Those kinds of things we are looking for, and make sure that you're preparing your buyer for this again way early, not at the time we're doing the inspection notice, but way early. Tell your buyer that we're looking for things that affect the structural integrity of the property. So foundational, whether that's the foundation or attic things, because that can be structural integrity on the roof and that kind of thing. We'll get into that a little bit later too. Health concerns and safety concerns. Those are the three things that we're really looking for. Everything else is homeownership type issues that all homeowners would deal with every day. But those three things are what we're looking for. And that's basically what then we are dealing with here on this inspection advisory report. So again, this is not an extensive list. These are the most common inspections that we see, or that most buyers would consider doing. So the overall inspection, what we would call the whole house inspection. So you would find, let me get back to, yes, recommending inspectors. So hold on. All right, so you'll find that you have your favorite inspectors and inspectors. There's always a plural there for all kinds of different reasons. You want more than one. You may end up with just one favorite one, but there are real concerns about that. So when when you say, so when you ask your buyer, so, who do you want who do you want to hire to do the inspections? Most of them will kind of look at you like, with deer in the headlight kind of, look, or, just that blank look. It's like, I have no idea. You absolutely can recommend three, at least three. There's different viewpoints on this as well, that you don't recommend any. That you say, well, you need to ask around. Who did your parents use? Who did your sibling use? Who did your friends use when they bought their last house? But I think that, that number one, I do think that it is kind of my job to know the right people. So I have a list of, I actually have a list of four, that, and I send that list. That's actually one of the things that I send to most buyers. It's actually in my buyer book. That I've sent them that list early on and suggested that they, at the very least, look at the websites of the inspectors. And number two, call the inspectors. Now, a lot of inspectors stay pretty busy, so are, necessarily going to pick up the phone when a potential client calls them, but some will do that or return a phone call in the evening, when they're doing their reports and that kind of thing. So, but at the very least, look at the websites and compare pricing. Most of them have those prices on there and breakdowns of how much each one of these inspections would cost. However, I also tell my buyers, sometimes it just works out to be, and they'll say, well, which one would you use? And I would say, I would use any of them. That's why they're on my list, right? I would feel comfortable using any of these. Sometimes, though, it works out to be the one that is available when we need them. And so that's that too. It quite often turns out to be that we are the ones that are that call to make the appointment, because remember, you are actually not only when the inspector is available, but you're trying to coordinate that with when the buyers are available, or at least one of the buyers, or at least one of the buyers for some of that time. The most important time for the buyer to be there is at the end of the inspection, because most inspectors don't want the buyers walking around with them anyway, looking at everything with them. But all inspectors kind of allow 15-20 minutes at the end of that inspection period to do kind of a wrap up, a summary, to show the photos that they've given, to show the areas of concern that they've run across. And so if your buyer can be there for that, if your buyer wants to be there for the full thing, that's perfectly okay too. And that's a really good time for the buyer to have some time there at the property to be measuring, for flooring, or to make sure that certain pieces of furniture are actually going to fit in the house. That's a really good time for that to happen. I also encourage buyers because, and especially if it's an occupied property. It's like, if you have any family members that want to come over and see the house, that's a good time for family members to come over. For us to make another appointment to bring mom and dad over to see the property, or to see bring Uncle Joe, so Uncle Joe can do his inspection. That if we're bothering the property owners that are still living in the property, our contract says that we're allowed reasonable access for us to make an appointment for the inspection, an appointment for mom and dad to come see it, and then another appointment for us to go over and measure for carpet. That's a lot. And sellers don't have to allow that, right? But and a lot of sellers do, just to kind of keep the peace, but I think it's a lot to ask for. So that's a good 2-hour window for all of those things to happen. All right, so don't recommend just one. You may be the one making the appointment, but make sure that you have given the buyer the opportunity to interview the inspectors and at least look at their websites. All right, so overall physical inspection, what we call our whole house inspection. Most inspectors do, stem to stern. They usually start up outside on the roof. Well, then also most inspectors will go into the attic to check the integrity of the attic structure. and then work their way down, and then finally end up in the basement looking at, foundational issues and the mechanicals and all that kind of stuff if the property has a basement. I always need to make that clarification. And they're kind of like a general practitioner doctor, right? They are looking at everything and they have a pretty good idea about everything, but they are not necessarily experts in anything. So they may recommend, if they see problems on the roof, they may recommend a roofer to come out and actually look at the property. If they think there might be problems with the HVAC system, the furnace, that's the heating, ventilation, and AC system of the property, they may suggest that you get an HVAC specialist, or they may suggest an electrician or a plumber or a mold test, any one of those things, because they're not experts in any of those, and we'll tell you that right up front. Most inspectors come from some kind of background, so they have an area that they are most familiar with or more familiar with, but they know a little bit about everything, and most inspectors will tell you that. So that's our whole house inspection. Number 2, infestation and wood destroying insect inspection, and you'll see those are 2 different things. We usually call it the termite inspection, but they're really looking for all kinds of other things, because there are other wood destroying insects. There are bees, there are ants, as well as termites. Infestation, though, they're also looking for any kind of critter infestation and bringing that up. But most of the time we're talking about wood destroying insect treatment, and we'll get to that here pretty soon too. But that's a lot of whole house inspectors are also licensed to do that, but make sure that you are getting a licensed inspector. A lot of inspectors either are licensed themselves or work closely with a licensed wood destroying insect specialist, and can usually get those done at the same time. So there's that. Roof inspection, most whole house inspectors will do a roof inspection, but again, as I said, if they see a problem, they will recommend to get a roofer out to give a more extensive inspection and to give estimates of if repairs or replacements necessary, and we'll give estimates of those. Structural or foundational engineering report. So once again, most whole house inspectors have ways of checking for any foundation issues, and we're talking about now the foundation, the basement, crawl space. If there's any movement, they know, they are trained to look for those things, but once again, they're not experts in that. And so if they see issues, they may suggest a structural inspection. A structural inspection should be done by a licensed structural engineer. And there are lots of them that work closely with us. And just ask, on any of these, we have some whole house inspectors that are service providers for our brokerage, and we have relationships with those. But that's a great place for you to start. As you become more experienced and get out and are out there working in transactions, you will run across other inspectors. There is no obligation for you to use the ones that KW and KC have as service providers, but it's a great place for you to start. Certainly, we cannot force any of our clients to use any of our service providers either. If your client knows someone that is a professional inspector, absolutely, that's fine. Uncle Joe with his flashlight and screwdriver is not a professional inspector. And even if Uncle Joe with his flashlight and screwdriver finds something wrong with the property, that is not enough for us to make a valid repair request. So make sure that if they want to use their own, absolutely, but make sure that they are qualified. What makes them qualified? There's a handful of professional associations that have minimum requirements for membership for inspectors, and so a membership in any of those, ASHI and NACI are 2 of them. At break, I'll probably bring up some information about those, but there are, and a couple of others, but they have minimum requirements for membership. a minimum number of inspections done under the tutelage of a qualified inspector, years in the business, numbers of reports, all that kind of stuff. So, so anyone that is a member of one of those recognized associations, we call a qualified inspector. Neither Kansas nor Missouri require licensure of any inspectors other than some of these specialists. The structural engineer has to have a license, but and be certified. But whole house inspectors don't. So just be mindful of that. Structural or foundation engineering report has to be done by a licensed engineer, and there are lots of them out there available. That's when we see significant movement in a property. So we're looking for either damage done to the structural integrity of the property, repair of such, or sometimes it's not so much a repair as just a preventative to make sure that there's no future movement of that property. So those all come up. I didn't pull one of those up. I need to do that too. I'll try to remember to do that over break as well. Number 5, radon, microbials, and other environmental pollutants inspection. So radon is one of those that we highly recommend that all properties have done, especially if there's never been one done. If there is a radon mitigation system already in that property, if it's, 4 to 5 years old, most inspectors would suggest retesting anyway, because things can happen in the house. It's not so much a failure of that system that's already installed, even though that happens sometimes too. It's just that fan may not, things happen. Radon levels change all the time. Another point for me to make about all of these inspections, but radon is released when the rock shelf underneath the property shifts, and as that rock shelf shifts, it may allow more radon to escape up through the property, or it may block off some. So if something major has happened and more radon is entering the property, the existing fan may not be pulling out as much as it should. So most inspectors will suggest that even if there's a current system, let's go ahead and do another test. It's $100, and be very, that's another one of the things when neither one of you came through pre-licensure class with me, but it becomes real easy for us to start spending our money, especially our buyers' money, sometimes our sellers' money too. It's like, oh, well, that's just $100. Well, $100 is a big bad bunch of money. Don't ever forget, $50 is a big bad bunch of money. $25 is a big bad bunch of money. And when you're talking about buyers that are at this point in time just kind of writing checks to everybody or spending money or giving their credit card to everybody, be mindful of that. So just say, well, it is $100, but and this is one of those safety health concern issues, right? Radon is a carcinogen. It is the number 2 cause of lung cancer, right under smoking. And if someone is a smoker and living in radon, that's kind of a double whammy there. So, especially, and I'm not going to even say that. So radon is a concern. It is so much a concern that the state of Kansas has required that we deal with it in our contracts. And so we do, for that reason. Not that Missouri doesn't take it seriously, but Kansas takes it seriously enough. It is a widespread enough problem in Kansas that Kansas KREC has mandated that we deal with the issue in our contract. So one other step back that I want to take here. All of these inspections are a photograph in time, right? It is a snapshot in time. The whole house inspector will tell you, well, yeah, the AC is working today. I have no way of guaranteeing that it's going to be working tomorrow, but it's working right here, right now, as I'm here looking at it. And that's the case with all of these inspections. All right, so the radon test, and we'll talk about that a little more in depth later on, because it's one of the things that we deal with quite often in our resolutions. But most whole house inspectors, again, are qualified to do that. There are some specialty companies that do just that. So, either way, but most of the time it's a 48-hour electronic monitor that's put in. So if your whole house inspector is doing it, they may ask to come out and install that monitor 2 days before the inspection, or they'll need access to the property 2 days after the inspection so they can come back and get the monitor. So it's a 48-hour test that monitors the radon level 48 hours. We'll talk about that a little later. Pool spa inspection, if there is a pool or spa on the property, this whole house inspector won't do this. There are a couple in town, a couple of inspectors in town that have pretty good reputations. So I would suggest that you know, if the property has one. This time of year, that's easy. Those are easy inspections to do. As we get into the cold weather months, when those, especially the pools, might be closed for the season or a couple of seasons. It's a little harder to do those inspections, so you know, bear that in mind. Same thing with the HVAC. Should probably hit on that here too. This time of year, we can test the furnace and the AC, but during the winter, we cannot test the AC because sometimes because the temperature has to be above a certain temperature. The outside ambient temperature has to be above a certain level for a certain number of hours, or we can damage the equipment if we try to test it. So again, that's for you all to know too, as you're walking through properties. If you're in February and it's been cold for several days, do not turn the AC on just to test it out. Leave those things for inspectors. All right. So, so make sure that when you are looking for these kind of specialty inspectors, the structural engineer, the pool inspectors, go on and look in the KC Metro closed agent a Facebook page, because those questions have been asked and the names are there. You know, do a search and look for previous questions, or to put out another fresh question there, because, you know, all of us are always looking for new people anyway. So, all right, soils geological structural inspection. So this is a little less common, even though it's on here. If you are, however, there are certain times that this does apply. If your buyer's looking to build on a property, not in a subdivision, because in a subdivision, we hope that the builder's already done the geological testing there. But if your buyer is buying a 5-acre lot and want to build on that property, doing a soils geological inspection is highly recommended. The soil quality, they'll see how far down the soil goes to see if a basement can be put in. So not something that you'll run across all the time, very often, but something that you should be aware of, that it's out there. Sewer septic inspection. So those are two separate things, but we kind of deal with them here. If you're looking at a property in the metro suburban area, chances are the property's on the public sewer system. Be very mindful that you might be surprised of the areas in Kansas City that are not on sewer systems. So if that's the case, though, that this property is connected to the public sewer system, one of the inspections that have become very popular over the last few years, and I think rightfully so, is doing a sewer line scope with a camera. A lot of plumbers will do this, but there are some specialty companies out there that just do this. That's who I recommend, because if someone comes in and does a sewer line inspection and they'll do the repairs, the clean out, or that, and of course there are exceptions to this too, but if it's a company that you're not familiar with, I would just kind of shy away from that, because, you know, it'd be real easy to find something wrong so that we can then also make give an estimate for repairs. So I prefer to use kind of the freestanding companies that just do the sewer line inspections, because they don't have a dog in the race, so as they say. So that's become quite common. Lots of reasons to do that. You'll hear that, well, you know, in the older areas, Old Overland Park, Prairie Village, Leawood, in Armor Hills and Brookside, those areas, clay pipe was used, and those clay pipes deteriorate and collapse because of our expansive soil here in Kansas City. So absolutely, that's true. But even on newer properties where they've used other materials, there are still breaks in those materials, you know, and because of our expansive soil, meaning that our soil expands and contracts depending on how much moisture is in them. And we have such wide fluctuation of weather here in Kansas City, those joints can become loose and that causes a problem. So I think just about any time, even on brand new construction, it may be when they're using a PVC type material, those joints may not have been properly done to begin with, or after the first rain, that joint became dislocated. So I think it's a pretty good idea for all of them. Once again, $200 or maybe a little bit more to have that done. But I think it's probably well worth it. So conversations for you to have your particular buyers. Oh, septic inspection. If you're dealing with properties that are not on public sewer lines, there's a septic system of some kind on that property, either a septic tank or a lagoon, or those are the two big ones that we have here. There are a couple of other variations, but won't run across those very often. That's a whole separate test and has to be done by a whole separate. Most plumbers don't do septic inspections. You have to find a septic inspector. And once again, there are some here in Kansas City that most of us have dealt with for several years and have, pretty good reputation. So you're going to find that someone's had a problem with every inspector out there. So don't always, take that. Most of the time it works out fine. Water well inspection. So once again, most properties here in the metro suburban area are connected to a public water system. But if you're looking at a property that is not, that is on a well system, and that's what they use rather than bringing in water, a cistern where they have water delivered and stored there. But if they're using their own well, highly recommend doing a water well inspection. And unless you're dealing with those properties, extensively, you're not going to know those inspectors. So again, reach out. Someone in our office has dealt with one and we'll have recommendations for you. Permits and zoning. So again, new construction or major remodels or rehabs, this would become an issue. Those are all done by the county or the city that the property is located in. So make sure you're familiar with that process as well if you are dealing with those kinds of properties. These last few are ones that we don't deal with an awful lot unless you're looking at these kind of particular properties. But again, we want to make sure that you and your buyers are aware that they're out there. Water rights, rural water district meter, water transfer issues. As you get into rural properties, and not dealing with the city water companies, these are some issues you might run across. Water rights have to deal with any kind of body of water that's on the property, whether it's a pond or a creek or a navigable body of water that they might be sharing with other people, or that runs through or is a boundary for their properties. There are water rights available on that usually, and you need to know what those water rights are. So go check the right sources for that. But a lot of the rural water companies do transfer ownership of the water meter between owners of the property. So make sure you're aware of that. And number 12, square footage, lot size, and boundary lines. Square footage of the property is usually determined by an appraiser. Again, we know how to use a measuring tape, but that doesn't make us experts in measuring properties. Certainly survey is something that can be done. Again, most of the time you won't be dealing with surveys unless it's on new construction. New construction that's never had a fence and your buyer wants to put a fence in, I would certainly suggest that they get a survey done. A lot of times we deal with surveys when we're dealing with with acreage, whether it's 2 or 3 acres or hundreds of acres. Surveys are quite common there. Any survey gets to be pretty expensive. Our contract specifically says that it's a buyer's expense, but we know that we can negotiate anything in contract. So if there is something about the property that might warrant a survey, warn your buyer that number one, it's the expected cost of theirs. We can always ask the seller to pay for it, but it can be expensive. Then our last paragraph down here, buyers acknowledge that all inspections are to be done at their own expense, except as the contract may provide otherwise, because we can always ask the seller to pay for it. Even if we're asking the seller to pay for closing costs, our inspection costs are an allowable closing cost that the seller can pay for, but the buyer is going to have to pay for them up front. So that's it's a reimbursable cost at closing. Be sure that your buyers are aware of that they have to pay for their inspections up front and their appraisal up front. All inspections are to be performed in the timeframes and deadlines agreed to in any sales contract. When we talk about writing a contract next month, come back and visit me. We'll talk about our timeframes there. If buyers elect to purchase the property without professional inspections, buyers are acting against the advice and recommendation of the broker and agent. Buyers understand they are responsible for verifying the required licensing and certification requirements of all professionals that may be provided to them by broker or agent. So that is a very important, all of this is important information, but that's a very important paragraph, and why I think that we need this in every buyer agency loop or room if you're using DocuSign. And make sure that you have that verbal conversation with the buyer too, that it's important for them to do their own inspections. And just my aside to you, it never turns out well if they don't. Past experience. All right, so that goes into our buyer agency folder. We've still got a few minutes before break. So, all right, so the breakdown of the loop, I would put my buyer agency stuff, things that are not shared with anyone else. So this is our buyer agency agreements, this form, the EPA lead-based paint brochure, the brokerage disclosure forms that we don't ask the other side of the transaction to sign our forms. The buyer's estimated of closing costs that's required on every offer that we write. So those things that never go anywhere else, I would put here in the buyer agency folder. Then once we are writing an offer or under contract on a property, I have a separate folder for all of those. And that's where I would put any then subsequent amendments, all of the addenda that are included initially with the contract, the seller's disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure, any other addenda that a lot of listing agents put offer instructions and those kinds of things. All of that would go into our contract folder. Then I would put our inspection folder separate as a separate folder within the loop, because it becomes a whole big thing, right? This is something that our contract allows for, the inspections to be done and renegotiation of the contract if the buyer finds unacceptable conditions. All right, so now that we've talked about the inspections, before we go on break here in the next 3 minutes, I'm going to show you examples of the inspection reports that you might, open the wrong thing, that you might see there. All right, so this is an actual inspection report on an actual property, and yours may or may not look like this. It depends on your inspector. All inspectors have different kinds of reports, but just to be, they all basically cover the same kind of information. They all look very different. This one is from Metro Property Inspections, one of our service providers, and also Metro is one of the companies that they do kind of a traveling career continuing education class for us. So that's available to you too, that Steve does. So this is always or that Michael does. And this is, so I just use theirs as an example. Once again, you can use whoever the buyer wants to use. You will probably find some on your own that you like as well. But Metro is one of the ones that I would say you have a good place to start here. And this is one that I got from Ingrid, if any of you know Ingrid in our office here. And so again, just be prepared that if any inspector is going to have a multiple page report. They can range anywhere from 30 to 50 pages. The number of pages is not an indication on how good the inspection was, but with the more pages, the more in depth it usually goes, more detail. This one has a table of contents here so that we could quickly reference where, if we know that there's a problem that we're going to be referencing, we can find that on here. But as we go through. So this one shows our summary. Most inspectors' reports will have a summary that will show things that don't necessarily operate the way they were originally intended to operate, right? That doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem that we need to address on our contract. Probably something, one of those things. Remember the 3 things we're looking for: structural integrity, health concerns, safety concerns. So this is where I always start looking. This is where I always start whenever I see an inspection report, whether it's my buyer or my seller. This is where I look here, all right? So you'll see the breakdown here. As I'm going through here, so some concrete's falling, okay, all concrete's gonna crack. That's one of the, we get 2 guarantees with property ownership here. The concrete's going to crack and that you're going to get termites, right? All properties deal with those 2 things. Everything else is, you know, that particular property. So is falling, minor concrete cracking there, some wood rot. I'll look into that. Probably caulk missing, maybe peeling paint, you know, those kinds of things. But I'm just looking here. I'll look at the report, but I'm looking here to see, oh, do I see anything that seems like a real concern here? Oh, swelling of siding, that might be. Exterior frame wood rot there around the windows. All properties have those, so I'll look to see what they say. But deck evaluation for repair, that could be one of those safety concerns, so I'll be sure to look at that. A ledger board, that's what that gave me that on the detail here. So a ledger board and incorrectly installed stairs and support beams are things that I would be looking for there. But you know, water stain damage in the garage ceiling, meaning that there might be a water problem. So I'll be looking through the full report, but this is just my indication of things that I'm going to be looking for specifically. Structural integrity, health concerns, safety concerns. The deck and the, what was the other one? Oh, the deck and the siding. So far, what I'm going to be looking for then as we kind of, electrical here, I always look at those 2 different breakers than the panel. We'll talk about that in the second hour of our class here. Some double lugging, we'll talk about that. So I'm going to be looking at the electrical there too. Breakers and extension cords, that's a safety concern, could be. So as I'm looking here, a little bit of shower head leaking, caulking, you know, those kinds of things might not be a huge concern to me. This is not a huge list of concerns that the inspector put here. It looks like a lot, but they're going to have every individual item listed out here. So this is not a huge list. I'm counting on you all to let me know if I'm sharing screen, but if it's not following me and you're not seeing it, things that I'm talking about. It's almost break time here, so get through this quickly. This is the radon report. As you have the 48-hour monitor installed in the property to monitor the radon levels. Just kind of want to show you what that looks like here. So this is it. This is our time interval. So it's a 48-hour test. We're going to have this here. There are 48 hours represented here, and we're ranging from 0.0, so what they all start out for. And it tells you what the radon reading was at every hour, right? Not for you to interpret necessarily, but down here at the bottom of this, it does say our overall average was 1.1. EPA protocol average was 1.2. Those are always going to be fairly close to each other. A 1.2 rating is well below our EPA recommended level of 4.0. 4.0 is that cutoff point that EPA here in the United States Environmental Protection Agency has determined. They recommend, no requirement, but they recommend mitigation of the radon if the reading is above 4.0. There's that. All right. Anything below that, EPA says is probably safe for most people to live in without a raised risk of cancer. All right. And then our termite, because, you know, that's what we call it, even though it is for wood destroying insects, as the actual report says up here, wood destroying insect report. So it'll tell you the address of the property, who's doing the inspection over here. Then it also tells you what they have found. As you will learn to read these things quickly, I expect you to read the first few that you deal with pretty, you know, get into the details of them, but you'll learn that what we look for here in section number 3, recommendations. This box is checked on this particular one. No treatment is recommended because they didn't see any evidence of live insects or any evidence of past activity and no indication of any treatments, right? So there are no, they say no new or live evidence found. All right. Or if the inspector has found either live activity or has found evidence that there has been activity and that inspector cannot find any evidence that the property's been treated, then they would check that the second box recommendation for the control of, and then they would say whether it's termites, um, carpenter bees or carpenter ants are the ones that we typically see. So those are the inspection reports that you would see. Of course, anybody can do a mold test. I don't remember really talking about mold and microbials, but because radon was kind of stuck in there too. Your buyer can also do mold testing. That gets pretty expensive, but absolutely. And so because a lot of people are very sensitive to mold. We are not a mold expert, right? You don't know what black mold is. You don't know what less harmful mold is. So only if you see mold can you say, oh, I see some mold, right? If it's again, EPA recommends anything more than a 10 square foot area, which is basically a 3x3 area. You're going to find mold in bathrooms. You're going to find mold in kitchens, especially under sinks and in bathtubs and showers. For me, that when I typically bring it up for buyers is when we're down in the basement and we see mold on a basement wall or on a bathroom wall. That's a concern. And yes, they can test for mold, but if we see a pretty big area of mold like that, to me, that's an indication that maybe we should go try to find another property. So, all right, so there's that. All right. My two ladies that are here, Autumn and Olga, we're taking our break. It is 9:56. We're taking a 10-minute break. I will see you all in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. Okay, we're back. All right, I did find a couple of things over break that I had mentioned as we were breaking up here. So want to point those out. I have the inspection list. I have the structural report. Where else did okay, the inspection list, right. So this is, again, I'm happy to send this to anyone that wants to use it. With a couple of warnings here, a couple of caveats here. So this is an old form. If the KCRAR, as I said, used to publish on their website, but they've taken it off. Again, this has a pretty extensive list here of possible inspections that a buyer could have, but it is still not necessarily complete. But it goes into a lot more detail. A couple of the other more common ones that that wasn't that we didn't address, that we don't address on the inspection advisory notice. It's a chimney inspection. And then EIFS, that actually, and the reason that is EIFS is what that is. If the property has stucco siding, that's kind of a separate inspection. If it has EIFS, which is EIFS is what some people call it, is kind of a fake stucco, and there were some problems with that. That was installed in the 70s and 80s. So most of those problems have been dealt with. However, if the property has not transferred between owners and that length of time, something that you might want to check into too. So, there are all of these things that are out there that there's no way that we can prepare you for all of them. But this is, and again, I would suggest that you look at this list and be familiar with them, so that because this goes into also the doing going to the county records and looking for zoning issues. If you know that your buyer wants to use a property for a particular purpose, make sure that that's, all of and make sure that that's approved by the city or county or county that the property is in. All of that is dealt with within our contract, within our due diligence period, which is basically our inspection period. Our contract also says that the buyer should be looking into insurance in that period of time to make sure that the property is insurable, and at a reasonable cost also, because and once you're under contract, the buyer should call their insurance agent right away. The insurance agent will give a bid based on the insurance agents can pull what's called a clue report, and it shows up in here somewhere. I know it's in here. Oh, clue right there. Oh, they have that one listed first. Which is a claim, and that shows any claims that were made on that property have been made on that property in the past. And if there's a water claim, if there was a water issue in that property, the insurance may not cover it, right? We may have to look for other insurance, and it may get very expensive, which may then disqualify the buyer from purchasing that property, because all of that's included in their monthly payment, right? So all of this very important to do within our due diligence period. And our contract says so. So there's the inspection list. If anyone wants that, just reach out to me and ask for it. I will forward it to you. Then I pulled up a structural engineer's report here, just again to show you what a structural engineer's report would look like. Sometimes people try to get by with just having a foundation repair company come out and do a structural report, and that's not quite good enough. Right? We have to have, and our contract says has to be a qualified professional, right? So Bob Quick is Royal Engineering is actually the name of it, because he has at least one other engineer working for him too, and Royal Engineering, but this one was done by Bob Quick, just to kind of show you what that's all about. They give general information about the house, as our whole house inspection does. Then they say, and within this report, they're going to have their recommendations. This one had some issues, so installing I-beams and that kind of thing. Again, the engineer is not going to give an estimate of that work. That's a separate thing that we have to deal with. But then recommendations of the work to be performed. I have yet to see one in Kansas City that didn't have the grading, maintain grading around the foundation, because soil compacts, and having water that when it rains or snow melt, that then comes down close to the house, if the soil is draining towards the house, that causes problems. That's probably the number one problem, you know, engineers have told me, is that the proper grading away from the house would solve 95% of the problems that we have, even with our expansive soil here in Kansas City. But the important thing that I wanted to show here is because he is an engineer, he is a licensed engineer, and so we have his stamp here, right? That's every engineer is going to have their stamp that they apply to their report. That's really what we need. All right, so we have our reports, but getting back to our inspection, our total whole house inspection report here. Also want to point out on the summary page here, as we get to it, these numbers that are over here, again, every inspector is going to have their own little system of doing this, but this is pretty typical of what most inspectors will have. So we have this 2.11 exterior concrete spalling. So that tells me where in that report I'm going to find it, because you'll see that there are no page numbers on this summary. Some of them have page numbers, some of them don't, but that tells me where I'm going to find that information. The ones that really concerned me, because again, when you get this report, make sure that you are looking at it and look at every page. So, you know, Linda's complained about lazy agents. You know, you spend enough time with me, you're going to hear me use that term, lazy agents. You should be reading everything, every word of everything that comes through to you on these things. Read the inspection reports, whether you're working with the buyer or you're receiving them as the listing agent on them. Make sure that you know what all of the inspection reports say. You should be reading the preliminary title report. You should be looking at every line on the disclosure, on the closing disclosure, as you get that a few days before closing time, before closing date. Those are all very important parts of our job. And I know a lot of agents kind of slide over that. So, you know, otherwise, why are these people paying us, you know, all this big money? So, but the ones that, so I would be looking through this report, which would take us longer than the 2 hours that we would, you know, that we're already halfway through here. So the ones that I was concerned about, I was concerned about the swelling of the siding, and I was concerned about the electrical panel. And those were the interior, the exterior siding was on 224, and the electrical panel (721) and 722. So this is, I can't remember how many pages are in this one, a lot. So, but I kind of want to show you. So most inspectors are going to have, you know, this kind of report. Again, everyone is a little bit different, but on this one, Michael said, okay, on the exterior, these are the things that I looked at. Then my checklist over here, the IN means that they did inspect it, not inspected. Means that either it wasn't there or it wasn't accessible. I don't remember what the MP stands for. R is recommendations, right? So that means that if he put an X here, that means that it shows up somewhere on the summary, and then they give more details down here. All right, so visual inspections of the deck. Here we're looking at the deck. Oh, that was the other one. Yeah, that I kind of had a concern about, was what was going on with the deck. Takes a while for all of these to load. All right, so he's taken good photos of all of this, and then his comments are going to be down here. Now the concrete spalling. Concrete surfaces in a partially worn concrete from spalling. That's pretty typical in Kansas City. Again, you know, concrete deteriorates. That's just what happens in Kansas City. What am I looking for here? Why isn't it showing yet? Because somewhere on there it said the ledger board wasn't properly attached. Sorry. Thought I found it the other day, but let's go on down to the electrical because that's what I actually dealt with. Oh, it was at the end. I see. Okay. The deck has damage. Oh, here we go. I knew I'd seen it. All right. The deck ledger board improperly installed. Again, that's something that we see pretty commonly if someone built their own deck and didn't hire a professional to do it, that there aren't enough or any lag bolts connecting the ledger board to the house. Safety concern because that means that the deck could fall off. You know, and we've had that happen in Kansas City, right? Where people have been injured, killed when a deck fell off of a property because there were, you know, a lot of people on a deck at a party kind of situation. So, so those are things that you might consider. What we ask for as we get to get into this, what we're asking for on our report are things that are a concern to the buyer. It's our job again to remind them we're looking for health concerns, safety concerns, and structural integrity. That is both. This ledger board falls into two categories: the structural integrity and the safety concern. So that might be something that your buyer asks for. I also want to show you back here, and I will be further on back here for the electrical. And my computer's running a little slower today than typical for some reason. We're just in the 4s. And once we put this into Don't Loop, we kind of have lost our page numbering ability. No, I guess we have it. It does have it over here. Almost there. So I should have found my page number. Okay, here we are in the electrical. And I passed it. All right, so they're showing the electrical panel here. And again, this is something that's pretty common. So that's one reason why I kind of wanted to show you all. So they're showing, this is, you know, these pictures, most inspectors are going to have pictures. If they don't, I probably wouldn't use that inspector. But this is the service coming into the house and they have pictures of the panel itself, and that's where they start. You know, through the house, they've also checked all of the outlets or they haven't checked all of the outlets. They've taken a random sampling of the outlets and tested those to make sure that they're grounded and working properly. All right, so two things that are here. Different breakers than the panel. Most inspectors will tell you that if it's a GE panel, it should probably have GE breakers in it. If it's a, oh, what's the other one? D, something, square D. Yeah, square D. If it's a square D panel, it should have square D breakers in it. If someone's replaced a breaker, they've probably gone to Lowe's or Menards or Home Depot and picked up, you know, kind of a generic one. And inspectors kind of have a problem with that. So that's something that's very common that shows up on our inspection reports, right? Because sometimes that is a safety concern. Here's another one that's very common here: double lugged on the breakers. So very common. That means they've wired too many things into that particular breaker. Each breaker is only supposed to have one wire on it, right? Sometimes, and double lugging means that there are multiple wires going to that breaker. Very common. Okay, so there are a few other things on this report that I might want to talk with my buyers about. You know, the swelling on the siding, we're not going to get into that. But all right, so we have our concerns, and let's say that that's the only thing, and that we had a high radon reading, even though this radon report that I have in this folder doesn't necessarily reflect that. So now the buyer said, well, you know, those electrical things bother me. and we have a high radon reading, so we want the seller to address those two things. So now we start the paperwork involved in that. Make sure that you are dealing within, you're doing all of this within the time frame that your contract allows. Our default on our inspection period on our contract is 10 days, but some buyers have shortened that to make their offer a little more competitive. I, on the other hand, would tend to extend that a little bit for a couple of reasons. You know, again, it depends on each and every situation. If you know that you can get your inspector, if you've already talked with an inspector and you know you can get them out within 2 days of going under contract, then that would strengthen your offer if you know you're in competition with other offers to give a 5 or 7 day inspection period. But in a balanced market, when we're not so worried about that, I usually add on a couple of days. It's not atypical for Linda to ask for 12 to 14 days for inspection period, and here's why. Of course, I would also tell the listing agent, hey, we're not planning on taking that long, but here's why we're asking for that. So our 10-day default, let's go with that. We know that there's going to be at least one weekend involved in that, right? And some inspectors will come out on Saturdays, but you're not going to get one on a Sunday. And even if we get our whole house inspector out early in the process, they may have suggested that we have a roofer look at it, that we have an HVAC inspector come out and look at it. So we want some extra time in there if in fact our buyer is going to be arranging for those things. If the whole house inspector says, yeah, there's some damage on the roof, we suggest that you get a roofer out there. Now our buyer, even though we certainly can ask the seller to do all of this, we want our buyer to be knowledgeable about it too. Well, you know, what are the exact problems? And let's get, from the buyer's perspective, an estimate, right? So you're going to have your roofers that you like to work with too, that you can suggest to the buyer, more than one, right? So, and most roofers don't charge to go out and do an inspection and an estimate of repairs. So there's that. HVAC, there usually is a cost involved in that, so that's kind of a different thing. So based upon what our whole house inspector finds, we may want a couple of extra days in there, and that's why I typically ask for a couple more. Again, every situation is going to be different, right? If we're in a real competitive situation, I probably wouldn't ask for 14 days, but have that conversation with your buyer about the pros and cons of that. All right, so let's say those are the two things that our buyer wants to ask the seller to address. After looking through all of the inspection reports, we've gotten them all back and we've looked at all of them. So two documents that we deal with here. So the first one is our inspection notice. And both of these are in the KCRA templates. So that because they're forms that we have all across the metropolitan area, all members of MLS have agreed to use the same, so we don't have to worry about what each individual broker's forms are going to look like. So we have our header at the top, as we do on all of our forms, where we identify our seller and their marital status, we identify our buyer marital status, we identify the property, and we have our effective date of the contract. We always, on anything, once we are under contract on a property, we have to address the effective date of the contract. A couple of things there. It's kind of a double check to make sure that you're doing everything within the timeframes established within your contract. Also, we are identifying this particular contract. The seller may have 2 or 3 offers, you know, that or 2 or 3 previous contracts that for whatever reason have fallen apart, or one, you know, I shouldn't make it sound like that happens all the time, so that everyone knows which contract we're dealing with. So we always have to have the effective date of the contract, make sure that you know what that is. Effective date is established by the date of the last signature or initial to the contract. All right, on this one, yeah, and I also made this up too, I forgot because I was doing this over the weekend. Let's say that our wood destroying insect report did show that there was a recommendation for treatment. If that's the case, I would check the box on line 7. Our contract says that if recommendation of treatment, if treatment is recommended by a professional, that the seller will do the treatment. That, of course, can be negotiated out of the contract. However, or not to apply. We can't negotiate things out of the contract, but not to apply. But unless that has been negotiated otherwise, we expect the seller to do treatment. So if our report said treatment is requested, then check box number 7. Box number 2 would be if the buyer says, no, I had my inspections, but I'm fine with everything there, right? And I'm not going to get into how we deal with this when we had the in its present condition, if we had an in its present condition on there, but and 2 boxes to check if in fact that is the case, or 1 of 2 boxes to check on line 19 that the buyer did their inspections, but everything was acceptable to them, or the buyer did not do their inspections, right? Check 1 of those 2 boxes if your buyer is taking option number 1 on this, that they are not going to be asking for any resolution of any unacceptable condition. What's an unacceptable condition, you ask? Defined in our contract, it is anything that's found on an inspection report that the buyer isn't happy with. It can be anything, all right? We've had buyers over the last few years that kind of got cold feet, realized that they may have offered too much on the contract to get the property in the heat of the moment of negotiations, and said, well, I don't like the fact that that outlet cover is cracked, right? So don't want to buy the house, right? So but it's anything that the buyer finds unacceptable. All right, so number 2, if the buyer did say, yeah, you know what, there's so much more wrong with this than we guessed as we were walking through, I don't want to buy this house anymore. This is one of those things that in our contract allows for cancellation of the contract, and the buyer can expect to get their earnest deposit back. Or they will only get their earnest deposit back if the seller releases it. So don't ever say, oh yeah, you'll get it back. But you can say that our contract allows for you can expect to get it back, but we have to get the seller's release on that as well. And then number 3, this is what our buyer, Betty buyer here, our single person buyer, has opted. There are a couple of things that if we can get worked out, she still wants to continue with the purchase. So that's what the offer to renegotiate. Make sure you're within your 10-day inspection period when you're doing all of this paperwork. So this is just their notice that this is what we are offering now. Buyer will sign it. So I would assign Betty's signature here. Then down here, this bottom box, very important for you to fill out. Inspection notice delivery method. How are we delivering this inspection notice? So because a couple of important things, we have to make sure that the other party receives it. We have to make sure that the other party receives it within the 10-day period or whatever period has been negotiated in the contract for inspection reports. This is what ends our inspection period. Once we have delivered this, that's a really important sentence there. The inspection notice is what ends our inspection period and begins our default on the contract 5-day renegotiation period. So that's why we have to know when this was delivered and that the other parties received it. So most of the time you're going to be working in .loop. So this is what I would put on line 37. Delivered by .loop, email .loop, right? Or you could just say .loop. But not only do I invite would I send it through the loop, I would also attach a PDF copy. Then also make sure that they have received it. Get that verification from them, if not through an email from them, via text or phone call from you. Make sure they've received it. On line 38, who are we delivering it to? We're delivering it to, in this case, we're dealing with the co-op agent, right? So Lisa Lister. And what date are we delivering it? Again, double check to make sure that that's within our inspection period. And then and that's where you would assign your signature on line 41. If we're dealing with a for sale by owner, we would be delivering this to the owner, right? So that to the seller. So that's what we would put on line 38. But make sure that you put your method of delivery, your date, who it's being delivered to, and that you've signed it. Very seldom are we delivering these in person anymore, but they've left it on here at the very bottom. If you're dropping this off at the listing agent's office, which is the way we used to do things back in the day, folks, a long time ago, that's what you would fill in there. You would have someone sign it that received it. Okay. All right. So that's our inspection notice. Then we get to the resolution of unacceptable conditions amendment. Once again, we had the case RAR 2024 residential forms. That's the template folder that you're going to find it in on .loop. We have our header, identifying our seller, identifying our buyer, identifying the property by full address. We don't have to have legal description on here, but full address, city, state, street, house numbers, street, city, state, zip code, and then our effective date of the contract. All right, then once again, the agreement set forth in this amendment constitutes the entire agreement between the buyer and seller with respect to resolution of the unacceptable conditions identified below. Except for the changes noted below, all of the other provisions of the contract shall remain in full effect. All right, so once again, notice of wood destroying insects. If our wood destroying insect report showed that there was a recommendation for treatment, we would check this box also. And this also tells us that the contract says the seller is expected to do the treatment for that. Not necessarily any repairs, but the treatment. All right. And then then now in the second part, we are now identifying how the buyer wants to resolve these issues. And we would check the box in line 1. Hadn't done that. So, or on paragraph 1. Nope, not ready yet. Okay. The wording here is very important. This is one of those situations. If you come through my full contract class, which I'm not sure that either one of you have, I give you the warnings that there are just a few places in our contract documents that allow us to put wording in, verbiage in. We're not attorneys, so don't try to get too legalese on these things. But my warning to you is that we need to be specific, but not too specific. All right. Be very careful when we're adding verbiage to the contract, either saying that a particular or an amendment saying that a particular paragraph doesn't apply anymore. Go grab the wording from the contract to insert there, because that's been approved by attorneys. Here on this is one of those things where we need to be specific. We need to make sure that it's clear what we're asking for, but we don't want to be too specific. So, yeah, structural integrity, health concerns, safety concerns. Then I will also say here, as we have gotten to this point, most of us feel, and most brokers will tell you, most of us feel, and you know, when we talk to Kristen or your broker, we all think that it is much better to ask for financial concessions than to ask for repairs. Unless it is a cut and dried repair, something that there is no room for interpretation on, it's best to ask for financial concessions. The electrical, plumbing issues, that's pretty cut and dried. Radon, right, that's pretty cut and dried. The foundation repairs, as you know, because we would want those done by the recommendation of our structural engineer. Those are all pretty things, not a whole lot of room for interpretation there. If you're asking someone to replace a cracked window or an inoperable window, and you want that window replaced, then we have to get into, well, this is the kind of window that we want. This is the model number that we want, because the seller is going to try to do things as inexpensively as possible when that may not be what the buyer has in mind, because that's the problem that we run. The seller may, to the letter of your request, make the repair that you've asked for, but it's not what the buyer had in mind, right? So that's why we, again, have to be clear, but not too specific, not too general. So the two things that our buyer wanted, other than the termite treatment that I dealt with up here, they wanted the electrical done, and they wanted the radon mitigation system installed. So this is how I suggest that you write those requests up. Number one, number each request separately. If you just put a big long list in here, that's really easy for people to, number one, overlook. Number two, it's not clear then when you're going through negotiations. If this makes it a little easier. Well, when the listing agent can come back and say, well, we'll do number 5 and 6, but we're not going to do number 7, or whatever. So that makes that easier. So just number each request separately. So I've got number 1. Seller to have electrical panel evaluated by a licensed professional contractor and have all recommended repairs performed. Because any licensed professional contractor, electrician, is going to come in and see the double lugging and the mismatched breakers. A licensed professional will be able to determine whether those mismatched breakers are rated for that panel or not, and will also then take care of any double lugging, because no licensed electrician is going to let double lugging continue on once they've looked at it, right? And so they're going to recommend that repair. So that's what we've asked for. We haven't added, because those are just the things that our whole house inspector found. A licensed electrician may find some other problems in there too. So that's what we want to have done. Then another thing that we add on any repair that we're asking any seller to do is the second part on line 22, the second part of that sentence. Seller to provide paid invoices, because we want those in our file. The title company is going to want them because, as you probably remember learning in pre-license class, anyone that does work to the property that is not paid can put a mechanics lien on that property. Title company doesn't want that happening, so everyone wants evidence that this work has been paid for. So that's why we want copies of those paid invoices. Then I also highly recommend that on the rest of line 22 there, per 7.2, 7.2.1 and 7.2.2 on the inspection report. We are asking for this repair because our whole house inspector referred this to us, right? So, right, just that's what the whole house inspectors said. We're not limiting it to that, but we're just saying, hey, that's where you're going to find this information on the whole house inspection report. So that's anytime we're asking for those kinds of repairs, make sure that you're asking for it to be done by a licensed professional, that you get the paid invoices that you put in there, that we're asking for the paid invoices, and refer back to the inspection report, wherever you might find it. If you're asking for foundation repairs to be made, then you would put attached structural engineer report. I sometimes forget to put that word attached in here, but you all need to be aware that when we are making these kinds of requests based on our inspection reports, that we have to send all reports to the listing agent. I just had that question come up from a new agent over the weekend. Well, we're just asking for this. Does that mean we have to send all of the reports? Yes, you do. Because if we don't have some kind of resolution between the two parties, the listing agent and the seller have the absolute right to have copies of all of those reports to pass along to another potential buyer in the future. All right, so anytime we're having those kinds of repairs done, this is kind of particular to just the radon, which is a common request that we have, so that's why I'm adding it here. Number 2, seller to have radon mitigation system installed by a qualified contractor, again, and provide test results showing the radon level is now below the 4.0 PCI that EPA recommends. Have it retested. That's not necessary when we have an electrician. There, by their requirements, they have to make sure that it's a safe system before they leave it. Same thing with plumbing, and all those kinds of things. But to add times that we would ask for a re-inspection report would be radon mitigation system. And again, you'll notice that I see that I've asked for the provide paid invoices here too. When we have foundation work done per a structural engineer's report, I would ask for the re-inspection of an engineer after that was done too, to make sure that the work was done properly and will do what was originally intended. So those kinds of things, ask for and put all of that onto the seller, right? The seller's the one now. We've done our inspections, right? It's not up to us to do, to necessarily, what's up to us to ask for what the buyer wants to, right? Can we absolutely negotiate that the buyer's going to pay for that? Well, sure. you know, or if the seller refuses to do any of this work, is the stuff that if the buyer's still willing to purchase the property, can they do afterwards? Sure, right? Okay, so, you know, sometimes these things kind of show up and you know, radon, yeah, sell it in a really competitive market. The seller says, well, no, I'm not going to put the radon system in because I've got 3 other backup offers waiting, you know, back behind you here. So absolutely, most of these things are things that buyers can do. There are some things that insurance companies would require that if the roof is in really bad condition, insurance may say, well, we're not going to insure the roof, that house until the roof is replaced. So these things kind of come up. Those are all special things, and we're not going to deal with here in this class. But if they do come up, if you're still in launch, talk with your coach, talk with your team leader, talk with me, with Kristen, Lynn, you know, Lynn Weymouth, our broker, deal with these things all the time. What shows up on line 34 here, again, we don't want to overload this page, right? That our buyer was, I think, pretty realistic in the things that they asked for. But you know, I've certainly seen this completely filled up with requests. You know, if you get to that point, it's like, well, do we really want to buy the property or not? Or can we deal with some of these more easily with a financial concession and let the buyer deal with it after closing? So, you know, all of those things. But if this is full, if you've made all kinds of requests here, on line 34, you have the ability to check that box and add more requests on a separate page. That's all that line 34 deals with, is that, well, we've got 17 requests and they don't all fit here. So we've got another page that fills that out. All right. All right, so number 2, and now I also want to say that our request can be a combination of all of these things. We can ask them to do the wood destroying insect treatment. We can ask them to correct some things, and or we can ask them to renegotiate the price or the seller concessions. And as I said earlier, most of us think that this is the easiest way to deal with it. There's also this concern. If your buyer's getting a loan, your lender doesn't want to see a lot of repair requests on there. That's we deal with this all the time. It kind of irks me that we write our contract based upon what our lenders want to see. But on the other hand, we are protecting our buyer. So, and getting the buyer to, you know, where they need to be. Now, don't ever put yourself in a dual contract situation where there's an agreement between the two parties that the lender is not aware of, financial concerns that the lender is not aware of. But there are times when and talk with your loan officer. It's not so much that your loan officer doesn't necessarily want to see it. You know, have that conversation with them. What they're concerned about is what the underwriter is going to see and the decision the underwriter might make based upon what they see in repairs. They might say, oh, no, we're not going to, you know, it's not a good investment for the bank to make if there's a lot of wood siding repair that needs to be done. So those kinds of things. So number 2, probably the easiest, probably the cleanest, and check with your loan officer. It says that right here, to make sure that you're not going over most loan products, programs have a limit to how much the seller can contribute to the buyer's closing costs, that they're capped out there based upon the loan amount. So if you've already asked for some concessions from the seller, make sure you're not going over that. So always have this conversation with your lender also. So adjustment of price and or terms. And it says right there in bold, underlined, that these options may require the prior approval of buyers, lenders, and have the potential to delay closing due to federal regulations. Because if it's VA, FHA, or even unconventional, if they're going by the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac guidelines, there is a cap to how much the seller can contribute. So we can change the purchase price, and we can do that here. That's an option. It certainly is an option. But remember, here's the thing to remember about that. And it's a good option if we have already asked the seller to pay closing costs in our original contract and we don't have that wiggle room here. But remember that if we've decided that rather than doing the repairs, the two parties have decided that a $3,000 concession, that both parties are happy with that. If we change our sales amount by $3,000, from the seller's perspective, it all is all the same. That's their bottom line. That 3,000 comes off of with their proceeds, however it's applied to the buyer. So it's the same for the seller. For the buyer, however, that's going to change their payment by just a few dollars, right? On a monthly schedule, that's really not going to affect them that much. What may be more beneficial, but only if we can, is the credit towards allowable closing costs or prepaid expenses. Seller agrees to pay additional buyer's closing costs and or prepaid expenses as permitted by buyer's lender. So once again, check with your lender to make sure how much wiggle room you have here and on line 43, this is dealing only with what we're dealing with here on this document. Let's say that $3,000 again, right? So that $3,000 is what the two parties have agreed to it's enough to correct the problems that the buyer's concerned about. Then continuing on with that sentence, plus any amounts previously agreed to for a total amount not to exceed. On line 44, if we have already asked the seller to pay $4,000 in the buyer's closing costs on our original contract, now we're at that $4,000 plus an additional $3,000. So line 44 is going to reflect that total $7,000. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, reach out to me with any questions that you might have. All right, so line 43 is all about what we're asking for based on our inspections. Line 44 is now our total of what we'd already agreed on previously in the contract, and then adding in what we're dealing with here. Lenders will, again, so make sure that's why that $7,000 may be over the cap that we have on this particular loan. So make sure you're talking with your lender before you get signatures on this and make sure that that's okay with them. Your lender may say that they prefer that to be on an amendment. If that's what your lender asks for, again, we're in the business of protecting our buyer and getting the buyer the house that they want, right? So if that's what your lender asks for, then that's what we do, right? If we have a combination of repairs and financial concessions, your lender's probably only going to want to see the financial concessions. So that's going to be on an amendment. I don't like talking about that, but that's what lenders do, so I want to prepare you all. So, all right, the rest of this is just making sure that the seller pays for it, that the buyer has accepted all remaining unacceptable conditions. They're asking for what they want. We have our buyer signature on the right-hand side here. This last box, I'm going to take just the last couple of minutes of class here. So let's say that we find out here. So, all right, now once we have the inspection notice sent to the listing agent or to the seller, if it's a for sale by owner, we have now ended our inspection period and begun our 5-day renegotiation period. The 5-day renegotiation period can be shortened or extended also. Again, it's very typical for me to ask for a 7-day renegotiation period because once we've gotten this list to the seller, they're going to want some time to get that roofer out there, or that HVAC person out there, or that electrician out there to get an estimate. So no reason not to go ahead and put that in our original contract, even though we can negotiate in the process to extend either one of those. All right, but so we've ended that. We've begun our 5-day renegotiation period. Like to warn new agents again of a little game that some agents like to play. Let's say that our seller went under contract with us, but then subsequently got a backup offer. We are in the dark about that. There is absolutely no requirement that they let us know there's a backup offer in place, right? So there's that. So we send our inspection notice over and this request for repairs. And let's say that that backup offer that the seller has is for more money. And that buyer's also told them that they're waiving inspections and they're not going to ask for any repairs. All right. That is a much better contract for that seller than ours is. Seller's under contract with us, though. So here's a little game that some of those sellers and listing agents like to play. They will determine that, okay, well, we've got this request for repairs and we know we're not going to do them. We're just going to ride out these 5 days. At the end of that 5-day period, the seller can cancel the contract. right? That's in our contract. So you're in your 5-day renegotiation period and you're not getting any answers back from the seller. You are under the very distinct impression that they are writing out that 5 days because they've got a backup offer. You're not getting any return phone calls, any return texts, anything. Now, if the listing agent is texting you back saying, "Oh, well, they've got a roofer coming out tomorrow," so, and you're in contact with them, I would say that we have to take them for their word because they can't lie to us, they can't be dishonest with us, right? But let's say you're just not getting any response back. That's when you need to talk with your buyer and say, here's my feeling. I don't think that we're going to get any response back from the seller. Distinct possibility they have a backup offer and they're going to cancel our contract at the end of our 5-day renegotiation period. Buyer, are you willing to accept the property even though we made this request? Are you willing to accept the property as you see it? If the seller refuses to make those, are you willing to accept the property in its present condition? Your buyer can make whatever decision based upon that they want to, but make sure that you're presenting this to them in that, as we're getting to the 4th into the 5th day and we haven't heard anything. As of midnight that night, your seller can cancel the contract. So if that's the case, if all of that happens and your buyer says, yes, I will still buy the house, then at 11:50 that night, if we haven't heard anything back, that's when we would check the box on line 84 and have our buyer sign it saying that, okay, never mind, we'll accept the property as is. It's over the last few years when we've had such a hot market and most sellers have received multiple offers or could receive multiple offers, that's been something that we've dealt with. But even in a more balanced market, it is still very, it's Murphy's Law of real estate, that a property can be on the market for 3 months and suddenly they will get 2 or 3 offers on it. So if another agent does tell you that, I wouldn't necessarily not believe it because it will happen to you. All right, I'm going to stop share here because we're really kind of done. It's 10:56. So you'll have a couple of extra minutes here. So no, don't say that I never did anything for you. But again, I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions about any of this, reach out to me. My text, you can text me. I answer texts a little quicker than I answer emails usually. My phone number is 913-219-2289. Autumn texted me the other day, and Olga did too, I think. So thanks for that. So reach out if you have any questions about this. If you want copies of anything that we've talked about here today, any of these forms, the inspection list being I guess really the one that we talked about here today, let me know. My email address is contractscoach, CONTRACTSCOACH @kwkey.com. So reach out to me that way too. So that's it. Everybody, today's supposed to be a real burner out there, real scorcher out there today. So everybody stay safe in the heat. Autumn and Olga, thanks for joining me in person or on Zoom here today. I'll probably be back in the classroom on next month with our contracts classes. So I hope to see you then. Anyone that's seeing this on Facebook, make sure that you're making comments and there so that we know you were watching it. I do check those comments also to see if anyone asks me questions in there. So, but you can also, again, just reach out to me with any questions. So that's it. See you all. Have a great week. Good luck out there selling, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Autumn.
Thank you.